Welcome back, everyone, to the broadcast. Tonight, we're going to talk about a special debate. This debate topic today will be about what do you regard as a crime. Well, I did submit an essay to the Attorney General Chambers in an exam. Discussing this latest textbook published by a well-renowned professor in Singapore. Discussing what laws and crimes are. So you see, what is crime and law to a person from a different part of society is someone else's food, someone else's job as a criminal. And you see, drug trafficking. Let's take the instance the issue of drug trafficking. Drug trafficking might be a job for someone, but it might be a crime under the law, and it might be a crime for someone in the legal industry who is deputy public prosecutor. Who is the public prosecutor? The Attorney General, the public prosecutor, was the person who is smuggling drugs as a convict. But the person, the mafia leader, who controls the Don, controls the gang, and relies on these drug profiteering businesses to continue his work, and sends families across the borders, young women dressed as ordinary folk, tying bags and bags of drugs, dope, in their bags, in their clothes, in the pram, across your airport borders, your Malaysian borders, across your shipping borders, disguising packages and trunk loads of goods as chemicals and drugs. Well, to them this may not be a crime. But I want to raise up a recent incident. Well, I did come across a case recently where tons and tons and barrels of drugs, of chemicals that were, if mixed together, would make the chemical formula of ketamine. Ketamine is K, the drug sold in the streets, which gives you a high similar to ecstasy. But it wasn't illegal for them to smuggle these chemical barrels as long as the chemical quarantine is separate. Now, what does this quarantine? Does this guarantee us of a crime? Is this a crime in place if you separate the crime, the gun? Let's say there is no guns allowed in Singapore, which is the case in Asia. But we separate the smuggling of the gun into different parts. We smuggle different parts and pieces of a gun, but it's assembled in Asia. The smuggling of it isn't smuggling because you're not smuggling a gun under the law. You're smuggling a bullet, something that will be made into a bullet later in Asia. You're smuggling bits and parts of the rifle and the gun. You're smuggling gunpowder, but gunpowder that's unmade. Is that a crime? Or is that part of a crime? Do parts and bits of a crime, evidence of a crime, make up into a crime? Because to legally sue and be caught for the crime, you have to have committed the crime, not parts of the crime. You don't get sued for smuggling one bit of a gun weapon. You don't get 15 years jail for smuggling parts of gunpowder. You don't get 15 years of jail for smuggling parts of cocaine or parts of chemically induced drugs that are made in laboratories. So what actually consists of a crime? Okay, so let's say there are many ways to murder someone. So, what is murder then? Is murder incapacitating someone? Is murder euthanasia? As a big topic. Is murder creating a suicide look real? Is murder is it murder when you're a soldier and you kill people under the eyes of the law, under the sanctions of the army? Is that murder, or is that weaponized destruction, or is that mass terrorism? Or is that, can you consider that terrorism under the eyes of the UN sanctions, that no longer is your army a legal capacity, acting in a legal capacity, but it's acting illegally, thus is terrorism? Or, which is terrorism in Afghanistan. There's terrorism in Afghanistan because it's no longer sanctioned by the eyes of the country and the Dominion state, and under the eyes of the treaties signed, proliferation treaties signed to acceding the United Nations. Does the United Nations even have control over your country anymore? Let's not talk about dominion and non-dominion state. Let's not talk about whether your country is part of the global community. Who gives a shit about the global community now? Is your country big enough to override the UN sanction? Is what we're asking. When there's terrorism and there's Russia superseding Ukrainian territory and overriding Ukrainian laws because US thinks it's the dog watcher of the world, and whatever US says, we do. Does US have any right to push Russia with its proliferation treaties, with its ban, with its suing and threatening Vladimir Putin, that it can do whatever it wants to Ukraine by pushing and tilting the barrel? The gun. They always like to play Russian roulette with Russia. Click, click, shoot. Let's see if it shoots Putin this time. If the gun still doesn't shoot Putin, will have to shoot the next person with his empty barrel with only one bullet loaded. What if we're shooting Ukraine for nothing? Because the whole incident sparked with just the Ukraine bombing. And Ukraine, like you said, is an independent country, and the terrorists are independent of the country, obviously. So why does US have a say in it? So is this a kind of terrorism that US is called imperialism? Is what we study in school. Is the US being domineering? Is this a crime? Can this be covered up as a crime? Can Clinton's crimes, can Barack Obama's impeachment and his constitutional breaches be covered up because they're crimes? Because there is such a rule that as long as you're on US sovereign soil and you are US sovereignty, you are unimpeachable by the state. You are unsuable. You're good as gold. You can never be sued. That I don't understand. Is there laws that prohibit the protection of, let's say, a public prosecutor's immunity, government officials' immunity from being sued? Is there a law that states that people with sovereign rights, like the Queen, or people who have breached constitutional rules, or people who are above us, have a say in being the sovereign, because we fear them, because we are less than a sovereign, a governmental function of the body of the state. When people ask me what is a crime, we don't go into, let's see, a crime is an illegal act against the state. It's an act against the human rights and against the human body. An act that harms the human. An act that creates harm and injury to the human body and sanctity. A civil right or tort, a crime. A crime could be anything. I'm defining all the different definitions of crimes that's been written in textbooks all in front of you to show you that what you think is a crime may not be a crime. What you think today as a crime depends on what the government thinks. If it isn't, if it isn't, let's say, helping the government that a man fights another man, he would rather put both men down to jail because, frankly speaking, the government isn't going to pay for all of your mistakes. The government doesn't care if you are drunk and you take drugs in the streets, or if you are hallucinating in the streets because you are suffering from intoxication from a biological or chemical weapon sent by an enemy state. The government frankly doesn't care if you're suffering from schizophrenia because there's overcrowding of poor people in the streets and there's a rampant disease of schizophrenia infecting people in the streets. Let's say schizophrenia is a chemical biological weapon disease, which rapidly happens in all wartime countries. Every wartime country in guerrilla state has experienced schizophrenic hallucination described in all international treaty conventions and cases. Let's say the government doesn't also care that there isn't enough mental health treatment and average care and MediShield and care for people in the streets, and especially people who suffer from broken homes, who are alcoholics and gamblers, especially Indian alcoholics. Let's talk about Indian alcoholics. Let's talk about a country where a minority race, or Indians. Let's talk about people who are Indian alcoholics. We all know that Indians, when they become dependent on alcohol, become alcoholic, and they don't think. They fight, they threaten, they extortion, they are arsonists, they're murderers, they're rapists, all under the name of alcohol. Who hasn't seen a black man run? Who has never seen a black man commit crimes while being intoxicated heavily by alcohol because of the broken state of the country and their race? Let's say because we're Asians, a more related race that rampantly happens to have a lot of crimes with the Indians. Let's say, who am I not to say that the government doesn't care if there's an Indian bar near my house, where all sorts of Indians go alcoholically drunk every night there to create all sorts of crimes there, but nobody does anything to stop them because Indians are alcoholics and the government doesn't want to be responsible. Doesn't want to be responsible for the family to provide extra care, extra money to come in because they spend all the money in alcohol. Yeah, beer is no cheap thing. Beer is for a pint at least $12. $12 a night spent by a person who's supposed to take care of the house on alcohol. At least one glass to get him drunk. And this is irresponsible. But does the government stop the opening? Let's talk about this. Franchise gangs these days don't really operate in illegal business. We operate mainly, let's say gangs operate mainly on bars, cartels, and strings of businesses that promote crimes. We don't have to take the gun to your head to get your money. We can open the bar, create the environment, create the drunkards, and shield everything and start a fight to create our gang fights, to create gang problems, to create crimes for you, to facilitate their extortion on society. And the gang just has to control the bar. The bar is usually bought by gang members. The women are prostitutes supplied by the gang. And let's say the drunkard Indian alcoholics, sometimes the gang members, or drug-reliant people. Let's talk about drug and alcohol-reliant people. People whom I've seen all my life day in and day out, relying on heroin shots, tying up end of their veins in a corner of a bar, in the corner of a street, a dark street. Relying on heroin to go on in life. The government closes its eyes, doesn't want to care, opens strings of bars in the neighborhood itself to promote a gang colony. But the government doesn't care as long as the bars bring incentives, pay taxes, and pays its bills. Pays the water bills, pays electricity bills. They bring in prostitution. It becomes an illegal brothel street. Let me tell you. Under the streets everywhere, every woman that goes to these bars are brothel women. A brothel is a prostitution service. I could open a brothel today and sign it under my legal name, and I can sell as many women as I want to you, but I may not be responsible for it because I can open it under a legal company name and illegally pretend I have some transactions, and then illegally I sell a lot of brothel women from Geylang, from any part of the world, to you, offering at lower rates. I could open a brothel, and I could control your brothel state and your women. Is that a crime? Apparently it wouldn't be so to a lot of people. So, hold on. Let's hold this thought, and I'll create my next video.